My name is Jack Mann. I was born on the 23rd of September 1925, and it was a very sad occasion as my father died a couple of days before my birth. So my poor mother gave birth to a boy without a father, and she had a little girl of 2 and a boy of 4. That was my sister Mireille and my brother Maurice. I grew up in Cairo, in Egypt. I attended a French school called the Lycée Français. I studied until I was nearly 17. And an uncle of mine told me about what was happening in Germany as they were killing Jewish people, putting them in concentration camp, and told me that I had to do something. He was too old, and my father would have been proud if he would know that I would go and fight against the enemy. And so I decided to join the British Army. I was engaged immediately in the Royal Corps of Signals, and I studied to become a radio operator. One of the sergeants said to me, "Jack, if you don't learn most quickly, we're going to put you in as a linesman." And of course, I didn't want to be a linesman, and so I kept on studying my Morse code, and I became good at it because I was frightened not to become a linesman. One day, the intelligence corps heard that I spoke some Italian, and he told my commander that he needed me in the intelligence service. I was given my assignment, and that was to go in a prisoner of war camp of Italian prisoners of war to gather intelligence. And I said, I couldn't accept that assignment, I said, because first of all, my Italian was just very rough. I couldn't speak proper Italian. I had only learned it from maids that we had at home or from holidays that we took either in Italy or on the island of Rhodes in the Aegean. And I told them, I said, I joined the forces to fight the enemy, to fight the Nazis. If caught in this prisoner of war camp, I said, they would find out that I'm not Italian, and then they would find out that I'm Jewish, and they would hurt me. They might even kill me. And it's not for that I joined the army. So they told me to wait, and I waited for about an hour. And they came back and they said, "Right, we've got a job for you. You're going in special forces, and you'll see plenty of action." He said, "Right, you'll be joining the LRDG." I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's the Long Range Desert Group." And within an hour, I was on my way. I joined the Long Range Desert Group as a radio operator. So, and they were happy that I could also speak French and some Italian and some Arabic as well, which I learned with the servants in Egypt. So it was quite valuable for the LRDG. I can't say I'm a hero that I just happened to be in the Special Forces, but my job was communications, and that's what I did. Of course, in communication, you also send messages, and after you send the messages are given to me. It's not I'm just a radio operator, and the job is to blow something up. I'm giving this thing, but I didn't do it. I just sent a message, and the Air Force came and bombed the place, which was in my message. You've got a very important job in a fighting zone behind the German lines or Italian lines. Without communications, you can't get food, you can't get ammunition, you can't get clothing, you can't get medicines, you can't get anything. I still remember we used a code called the Q code. It was 3-letter code. The first letter was always Q. Like QTC means a message. QSL, I've received. QSA, the strength of your signals. So it'll be QSA from 1 to 5. Huh? 5 is the best. QSA 5 means you can hear very well. Now, besides other people calling in different languages or the same language, but you don't know what, because they're all together on the same length. So beside the languages, you have what we call atmospherics. You know atmospherics, it's the wind and other things. You get, all sorts of things. You have to listen very carefully to your station. And with all those stations going on in atmospheric, you're listening to them. So if it's really bad, you send a message to whoever's sending you a Morse, to send each word twice. And remember, the first difficult thing is all in code, so you can't guess the words. If it was plain language, because you'll only use plain language, it's so urgent you have no time to put the thing in code. So if you send each word twice, you got a chance to, if you didn't get the first time and second time, or you missed a letter, well, then they have to guess when they translate it. Well, it's less difficult. Now, the good thing with the double coding, it makes it very difficult for the person who receives it. I mean, it could, and I'm not saying a friend, but the enemy, it's difficult to decode. But everything can be decoded. But by the time they decode, it doesn't matter any longer, because whoever received it has done what he had to do. And by the time they've decoded it, it doesn't matter anymore because it's done. Once in the long-range desert group, it was decided that we'd finish with the desert and we had to train as paratroopers. So we were sent to Palestine, which is now called Israel, and we went to an airfield called Ramat David in Galilee. And the course that takes 8 months in the United Kingdom was done in exactly 9 days. In those 9 days, we had to do a bit of ground training, which meant being put into a parachute harness and pulled on stones by 2 or 3 chaps. And the quicker we got out of the harness, the less hurt we would be, as the swords were very hard, and we didn't like that part of the training very much. Then we had to jump from a certain height, and that was not too bad. The last thing was more difficult. It was jumping out of a lorry going at 30 miles an hour. And then the parachute training started, and we did, if I remember rightly, 6-day jump and 1 night jump. Before our first jump, there was a major who said to us, "I'm going to do a parachute jump and you'll see and you'll know what's going to happen." And we said, "Yeah." He said, "There's nothing to it. It's all automatic." So there we were, and he went up, he jumped. Unfortunately, his chute didn't open. And what we thought was a gory mess. And a third of the fellows wouldn't jump, and they came out of the unit. And that's a true story. Of course, the first jump was a bit worrying because we'd never done it before. We knew we had to jump into the sky, but the sergeant who was giving us the training said to us, "Don't worry, you're hooked onto the plane and make sure you are hooked." We had what they call a static line, and there was a little hook that was hooked on the plane, and that would break as we jumped, and our parachute would open, hopefully. The ladies who packed the parachutes were women in the British Air Force. They were called the WAFs. And we got to say the same thing as we heard the other boys say to these girls. As we picked up our parachute, we said, "If it doesn't open, I'll be back." And we always used to laugh about it. And they said, "Yes, we've heard this before." The night jump was a bit more difficult because we didn't know where we were going. It was pitch black, but I landed safely and was very happy that I got my parachute wings, which I put on my left arm. But when you haven't done anything, you're trying to join. Don't tell them stories that you're this and you're that and you're that. It says, no, you're nothing. You're nothing until you've done something. You've proved yourself. I just proved myself in Morse. They interrogate 60 people from the parachute regiment, one of the airborne divisions. How many did they take? Not one. He says, all they want you to be reliable. I said, glory comes afterwards if you do something, if you do something. Eventually, I was useful for other special forces that needed me because of casualties. And so I went to the SAS and the SBS. With the SAS and SBS was completely different. The SBS, we did everything by boat. So we had small boats and we had bigger boats. So we had what they call the MLs, and we had the MTBs, and we had the kikes. And the kikes were what we used most to the job, going as like fishermen. And the German did the same thing. But occasionally we had some difficulties, accidents, mistaking one for the other. In other words, two different kikes, same unit, shooting at each other. But fortunately it didn't happen very often, but it did happen. I didn't get the experience, fortunately. I was on the island of Chios. I had a bad experience, which was there was a marine mine that two people from the Royal Engineers, or RIMI, came to defuse. Unfortunately, they blew up with it and died. And some of the inhabitants just got hurt. Nobody died, but the daughter of the local barber, the youngest one, got hysterical when she saw bits of flesh on broken windows from those two engineers. This is something I remember sadly. But in one place, they had a young boy who wasn't well, and they asked if there was a doctor. And of course, we had no doctor with us, and I was the only one who had done first aid at school. So I said I'd look at the boy, and first thing I did, I got people out of the room. It was so many people in the room, and it was very hot, and I opened the windows, and all I could give the boy was some tablets, which each tablet was equivalent to an orange, and that helped him. And then, as I came out of the room, I saw a queue of long people, and they all calling "Yatre, Yatre." It, in their language, it means doctor, doctor. I said, where is the doctor? I said, you are the doctor. I said, I'm no doctor. But it was terrible to see those people looking for the doctor, and then putting their hand on their tummy, going like this, means that they were hungry. They were hungry. Yeah. I remember once we gave our food away till we had no food, and going out, we met up with another guy from the Royal Marines, and they gave us some food. They could spare a little bit. I had problems with a chap who came on one of the raids with us, with the SBS. He wasn't SBS, he was just the uncle of somebody, and he wanted to write something about it and all that. And he came, and it was my turn on that little boat that I showed you, little keg. It was my turn to be cook. Well, what's a cook on a small boat like this? You put a few tins together on a big pot, and then you say, come and get it. And the boys came and get it. Whether he was the commanding officer, was a colonel, or was a major, or was a swaddy, they all came and got their mess tin full of grub. Well, this chap, I think he was a major, he wanted to be served. I said, And I wouldn't serve him. I said, no, everybody comes here and they get it. He said, I'm an officer. I said, I don't care. I said, everybody comes. They said, they're all, higher than you. But everybody, that's how it is. With whether it's SBS or SAS or LRDG, they're all the same. They couldn't believe that you called each other by the first name, but you have to respect the people. But calling by the first name is just because we're all in the same boat. So with this chap, got into trouble. I can tell you the story, because there was three things, and he said, you have to punish him. So they said, one of the things, I had to climb a rock, and the rock went down and made a hole in the lifeboat. We only had one lifeboat, made a hole in the lifeboat. So they were angry. I said, when I put my foot on, I didn't know that the rock would fall down. I wouldn't put my foot in it. It's a good job that I didn't fall as well. So that was one thing. And then that I didn't give food to this chap, this major. And then there was another thing. Anyhow, the thing is, they put me in a prison when I got back in that prison. And I had my own cell. There was cell one next to the. And I said, I want to see the Russian ambassador. Can you call it the Russian ambassador? And I made a lot of noise, and I said, I'm a volunteer from Russia. I said, I want to see the Russian ambassador. So, in my paybook, where it said Jewish, I'd crossed it off, and I put Russian Orthodox. Just in case, because if I was caught, they wouldn't kill me because I was Jewish. So, anyhow, they called the chap who was in charge of the prison, it was a major or something, and he said, send him back to the unit. We don't want any trouble with the Russians. And I got back, and everybody said, how did you get back? I said, listen, I'm trained by the SAS, SBS, and LRDG to look after myself. Whichever way you can. They told me how to steal, how to do this, and how to kill, and how to, they taught me all sorts of things. On one island, we conquered the island, but I didn't know how strong the stuff was that they gave me to drink. Completely flat. I mean, I got so drunk, it was on the island of Chios on Uzo, but I didn't know it was strong stuff. They mixed it with water, but I just drank it. I was lucky to be with nice chaps, and there was never a question of religion, are you Jewish, or you're Christian, or you're Muslims, or you're Buddhist, or you're... Never came to mind. And you got one job, and nothing else. You're in a fighting force, maybe the best, as they say. When they talk about LRDG, they say, fantastic. SAS, fantastic. SBS, fantastic. What does one know when one is so young? And my father would have been proud. Oh my puppy, oh, my mummy, give all your love to me. I'm gone away, you see, across the 7 seas. What for? To fight the Nazis for our liberty, for our king and country.